Today I'm installing the timing kit on my Saturn S-Series dual overhead cam engine. This is a model year 95. The kit is the same for 91 through 98. 99 through 2000 uses a slightly different kit, but the procedure is more or less the same. I've got the engine out of the car. I just installed this professionally rebuilt head. You can click here to see the video on that if you would like. The fact that I've got it out of the car hopefully means I'll be able to give you a good visualization of what's going on here, because when it's in the car it's really kind of hard to see some of this stuff. It's dirty, there's not a lot of clearance, so hopefully this will help you. Now if you're doing this in the car, then it is perfectly doable, but you've got a lot of things to remove, like the wheel, the splash shield. You'll need to support your engine from underneath and remove the top engine mount. You'll need to remove the serpentine belt and all the pulleys, your power steering pump, your crank pulley. If you have problems removing the crank pulley, go ahead and click here to see the video on how I removed mine. And you'll need to remove the timing cover. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, here's what I'll be working with. My timing kit includes the 2 sprockets, the 2 side chain guides and the top chain guide, the tensioner, the chain. I'm reusing my old fasteners. I've cleaned them up and made sure they're in good condition. Now I'm using breaker bars with sockets. You can use wrenches or you can use ratchets, whatever you prefer. Here I've got a 10mm, an 8mm, and a 15mm socket, a large adjustable wrench, a small torque wrench. I've got a 10mm socket on it, and a large torque wrench. This mark on our crank sprocket is lined up with this mark on our engine block, which means this engine is currently set to number 1 top dead center. This is an interference engine, so to make sure that nothing collides inside the engine while we're making adjustments, we're going to go ahead and rotate it to 90 degrees past top dead center, like so. Now I'm going to go ahead and install my camshaft sprockets. Just to point out, this little indentation here lines up with this tab so that it will only fit on in one position. Once it's installed, we're going to go ahead and rotate it so that this hole lines up with this hole, and then we're going to pin it in place. Also to note, each of these sprockets is stamped with the word front on it, so you know which side faces out. Both of these sprockets are the same and interchangeable. Our camshafts have flats in them that are made for a wrench to fit on. Here I've got our adjustable wrench, because we need to go ahead and torque these to 74 foot-pounds using a 15mm socket. Now that we've got our camshaft sprockets installed and torqued down, we need to rotate them to the right position for top dead center. So again, we're going to put our wrench on the camshaft flat. We're going to go ahead and rotate it, and I'm using a 3/16 inch drill bit to pin it in place. Same with the other one. By pinning these, we know that all our valves are now in safe positions in order for the engine block to be brought back up to number 1 top dead center. At that point, everything will be lined up for us to go ahead and get our chain installed. At this point, we want to return our engine to number 1 top dead center, so we're going to line this mark up with this mark on the block. To begin installing our timing chain, one thing you should notice is that there are a couple black links on the chain, and these are going to line up with our marks on our camshaft sprockets at the top, there and there. Just like that. Here I'll be installing my fixed chain guide. Now these black links go on the bottom center of the camshaft sprocket, which I forgot to mention in my list of parts that came in the kit. I've applied red Loctite to each of these bolts. Now it's very important that there not be any slack on this side of the chain. Any slack right now needs to be over on this side where our tensioner is going to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the small torque wrench because it's easier to read small measurements, and I'm going to torque these each to 26 Newton meters. Here I'm installing the other chain guide. This uses a special bolt. I've applied red Loctite to it, and you want to make sure that you scrape clean underneath the head of the bolt, because if there's any gunk up in there, this isn't going to work properly. See how that needs to pivot? We're going to tighten this to 26 Newton meters, just like on the other guide. And then we need to make sure that it still pivots freely. Now, the first time I did this, this would not pivot freely when torqued down, and it was because there was some buildup of just junk underneath the head of this bolt. There's a very little tolerance for this to pivot in there, and it wouldn't pivot freely, which is very important. Our tensioner has a small piston that presses on our guide to keep the chain tight. It's actuated by oil pressure through this hole, which is fed through that hole. We're going to tension these two to 14 Newton meters. Now I can remove this retention piece to release the plunger. At this point, it can function as necessary. Finally, I'm going to install the top chain guide. The top chain guide is retained by these two bolts, which are part of the bearing caps for our camshafts. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those. These are 8mm. Top chain guide in place, bolts back in. Here's a view from the other side. These will get torqued to 14 Newton meters. Okay, let's review everything to make sure it's set up the way it should be. Our crank sprocket has this little mark on it that we have lined up with the mark on our block. So that means that we're set to number 1, top dead center. The two black links on our timing chain are at the very bottom of the crank sprocket, opposite the mark. We've got our tensioner installed. We've gone ahead and removed the retainer so that it can function. We've got our two chain guides installed. All bolts are torqued down. These are all 10mm. Our chains are laying on our chain guides the way they should be. There's no slack in our chain. Everything's nice and tight. The black links on our timing chain up top here coincide with the little dots on our crank sprockets. We've got our crank sprockets pinned to the holes in the head, and we've got our top chain guide installed, and the chain is laying properly within it. If everything is the way that it should be, then at this point we should be able to unpin our sprockets, and we should be able to now rotate our engine crank clockwise and have everything function the way that it should. Now, prior to assembly of the engine, I'm going to apply some lubricant to the whole system here so that it's not running dry when it first starts up. If you found this video useful and well presented, then I ask that you please take the time to give me a thumbs up. And if you're interested in related videos or more information on my Saturn project, why don't you go ahead and check out my channel, see my other videos, and consider subscribing. Thank you.